Over the past decade, the face of the Boston City Council has changed dramatically with the election of 6 women of color. They include the council's top vote-getter running at large and new members in 2 council districts. Tonight we talk with one of the new councilors from District 1, which includes East Boston, Charlestown, and the North End waterfront. I'd like to welcome Lydia Edwards. Thank you very much for being with us, Councilor.
Thank you.
You've long been associated with housing issues, and you're going to continue to do that. But I got to ask you about one of the first things you did as councilor. A couple of days into the job, you had to deal with the snow. What did you do?
Yeah. We had a bomb cyclone in the first week, and we had thought about ways in which we could really develop community through service before, when we were just kind of that 2 to 3 month kind of period where we're just trying to figure out what we want to launch and so on and so forth. And so this proved to be a perfect example of when and why we needed to have our Snow Angel program. And I was lucky enough to talk with Jake from South Boston, who has been part of doing that for years. And I said, I kind of want to bring this over to our district, make it district-wide. And essentially, we put out the call for volunteers to come help shovel out some of our seniors or people with disabilities. And we had a huge response. And so now we're just waiting for some snow. But I'm not waiting for snow. But I'm excited to see how people were really excited about helping one another and connecting with other folks. And we would exchange their numbers, they call each other. And there are people who had maybe not met their neighbor down the street as now committed to making sure that he or she is going to be okay and that they know they can call somebody.
Of course, one of the other things that's also traditional for councilors is if there's a big development plan in the district, they have to at least watchdog it and maybe try to tweak it a bit and make sure people in the neighborhood are heard. You've got one plan going on in Charlestown with the public housing, and you have Suffolk Downs, which is, I guess, whatever, it's going to be enormous, isn't it?
Right. And they both have 2 different approaches. I mean, you have the Suffolk Downs area, which is privately owned, and then you have the BHA housing, right, that is publicly owned by us. So how you approach and how you bring both entities to the table, I think, is really important to note the differences. We've been lucky with Tom over at HYM. He's been actually very good about getting out ahead and talking to a lot of the community groups. And I think what I'd love to see more of is the city conversations that are happening, with Amazon and in terms of trying to get them to come in. I'd love to see more kind of openness and transparency about where those conversations are going and what's being offered. There's so many rumors that they're offering planes and so on and so forth. And I think the city could push a little bit more in saying who we're talking to, why we're talking to them, and what we're trying to get for the city. We don't want to be feeling that there's a blank check being written and it's going to be paid by the residents of East Boston. At the same time, over the BHA housing, there's so many levels of the planning. You have a private developer, you have the BHA housing, and you want to make sure that as the plans are coming about, that the community actually feels like they're part of driving it. Because there will be such a huge impact on this 1 square mile of Charlestown, that unless they are part of leading that conversation, that I don't think that there's really going to be a responsive plan that actually is going to be satisfactory.
Well, Suffolk Downs looms large as a place for all those young professionals being hired by companies like Amazon or some other company to live. But on the other hand, you got service workers at East Boston's Logan Airport, and they can't afford to live in the neighborhood. So what about them? Is there a place for them in this plan?
Well, that's the goal, I think, is that there will be IDP, so that means a certain percentage of the units will have to be affordable, I think 13%, and making sure that they are actually really affordable and that they're not just affordable to anybody who's moving into Boston for the first time, those new workers, but to the folks and families who live right now in East Boston who are struggling to stay there. Hopefully, if done right, it could be a relief on the market and allowing more units to come in and folks being able to have a real choice about where they're going to put their kids. But again, we have to make sure that we're talking not only about affordability, but pathways to ownership. I'd love to see more of that. Looking at rent to own as one of the options, and also community investment. How can or if we can pool our money together to be part of this future as well.
Another thing that you're working on is trying to get some sort of control over real estate speculation. Now, I know there are changes in supply and demand, and sometimes the prices go up, but there's a difference between that and speculation. So talk about what it is that you're trying to target with this. I'm
specifically targeting folks who are coming into real estate, seeing it strictly as investment only, and pulling out as much funding and money that they can. It's a hyper I would say, capitalism on or market driven on steroids. And what they're willing to do that is can be atrocious. They can buy up several buildings, buy them, and then do such shoddy work because they're trying to squeeze as much money out of it as possible. They're doing it as fast as possible. In one case, we've had buildings collapse that the work was so horribly done. So they're willing to they're not willing to also pay, prevailing wage for folks to help build on those buildings. So they're taking money from workers, they're taking sometimes housing from folks, and they're willing to evict to do what they have to do to get that unit or that building. So that's one form of it. I think there's a real concern about, and we've seen this, that there's a real push for foreign investment to own, right? Just to own stock. You own better piece of stock that you could never have is a piece of Boston real estate, and you hold on to it. You don't actually put people in there because it's a headache to be a landlord, and you hold on and then sell. And so you're just sitting there and just preventing people from actually living in these luxury units or other units in order for you to cash in on your investment. And that's different than the traditional wealth building model that small landlords partake in. I buy the 3-decker, I live in it, I care for it, and that 3-decker then becomes my retirement one day when I sell it. That's the long-term 30-year plan that creates community. This one really helps to break it.
This has been on news, and we're talking with the new city councilor from District 1, Lydia Edwards. You have a legal background, so if you're rewriting, I guess, the tax code for the city of Boston, how do you sift out that kind of bad speculation as opposed to other, kinds of property ownership and revenue?
Sure, I think there's a couple ways, right? It's, first of all, at the city level, what we can do is pass a home rule. So we'd still have to go up to the State House. But within our research of the units that are available, we have several models, right? You can look to models in Canada that implemented a foreign investor tax. I think there was some talk in Seattle about doing it. So it's not unheard of. And how they found the investors, how they labeled them, how they defined what their investments were is well, that's what we're going to have to learn from. Part of this also is just setting up the conversation on speculation and really actually hearing from folks directly. Now, some people called me and said, I don't think that that's fair. I am flipping and I am becoming, I don't have a degree and this is how I've managed to make money for my family. I feel like you're targeting me unfairly. And I said, I'd love to hear that. I'd love for you to come and testify at the hearing specifically about that. If there's an overreach in this, I need to hear it. Hold me accountable. But I'm not going to stop having the conversation about speculation. I think that we have had a wonderful conversation and discourse about building and building and building and building. But if you build and then don't protect, that's a conversation I want to have.
Of course, one of the things I remember about speculation that I looked at in quite a few records about 10 years ago is how speculation can go viral, and you get these inflated values for phantom transactions.
Right. You have phantom transactions. We have also just seen I think it's the Wall Street Journal, that with short-term rentals, which some people could see as a form of speculation, where a person owns 30 or 40 units and literally is just renting out apartments under an LLC, and with the sole purpose of having Airbnbs in them, because the return on that investment is huge. So you can just be a professional renter essentially and have Airbnbs and have them cleaned, and that's an informal way of hosting a hotel. But look, you're taking away units in 3-deckers, you're taking away units in high rises, and you're not actually trying to house anybody. You're just literally trying to make as much money as possible off that square footage.
Well, what about short-term rental? Do you think Boston's housing market is elastic enough so you can have all the short-term rentals the market can generate and still leave enough housing supply for the rest of us for what we need?
No, I don't, and I also think that I think that unless we figure out how to get a hold of short-term rentals, that could end up being the rule of the day, because we live in a great place. We're by the airport where I live. We're in an urban environment. We have a large tourism industry. That could end up becoming what our majority of our units look like, are Airbnbs, because that's where the money's at. And that's where people are coming for short terms and short timing to just come to Boston over the weekend. That could become a majority of our units. So again, building without controlling how and those units are going to be occupied or who's going to be there is not good enough.
How can you control the growth? I mean, I guess one of the main ways is to go after maybe the companies that do it on a large scale.
Yeah, because short-term rentals aren't new, right? We've always had 3-4 months rentals. If you can go to Cape, they've been doing it for centuries or years. I'm not sure, but the platform of, I guess, FlipKey or Airbnb has so exponentially increased the amount of people who can do it because it's made it easier to get it done. And so, yeah, it's bringing those those companies to the table and saying, you know, we need to protect our housing stock. You can be a partner. Or we can be a problem, and we want to make sure that we're talking about registration, that we have licenses, that we have insurance, that we have you basically only going to a licensed pool of individuals, that we limit how many days that can be rented. For some of us, we think we should go to just strictly owner-occupied units, because there's a real concern that by having so many units rented out, the absentee landlords, if it's an LLC, could be living in California. What does he or she know about what happens with this building if it catches on fire, if the tenants are horrible, if they're throwing their trash all over the place? We want people on site to be held accountable.
You know, I'm still learning about this market, but one of the things that surprises me is that it seems that some companies or maybe individuals, they're more willing to rent something out that's actually occupied for maybe 90 days a year than leased out to a regular tenant with a full years of lease.
Do the basic math. If you look at the average short-term rental, I think when I was talking to somebody in the administration, it's about $205 a night for a short-term rental, an Airbnb or whatever. Now, multiply that by 90. So when I did that quick math, it was $18,000 and some change. Now you divide that $18,000 by 12 months. You're talking about, on average, about $1,500 a month. So I can make that by having someone there all year, or I can just do it in 90 days. You know, I think we're trying to get to the tipping point where it's more profitable to rent to people than it is to have the short-term rental. But I don't know that the 90 days really does that.
By the way, there is a hearing coming up in this measure pretty soon?
I believe it's February 13th, and I hope folks come out and express opinions, pro and con. You know, there's some people who are just like, it's the market. You know, wake up and smell the market, if you will. And that's fine. That perspective is really important to have at the table. And I think that we need to also make sure that we are dealing with the actual day-to-day concerns of Bostonians and how short-term rentals are not necessarily helpful when it comes to them.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Boston City Councilor from District 1, Lydia Edwards.